I'm Craig Leaderhouse. Thanks for listening to the Afternoon Edition, weekdays from 4 to 6 on CBC Radio 1 in Saskatchewan. It's a dilemma experienced by many women facing violence. They want to stop the cycle, but they don't know where to start. And you might be surprised to learn that the wealthier a woman is, the less likely she is to know where to turn. That's just one of the findings to come out of a year-long study in Prince Albert. This afternoon, Setting the Stage released a report about violence against women called End It Now. Keri Okanik is the Community Plan Coordinator for Setting the Stage, and we've reached her over the phone from Prince Albert. Hi, Keri.
Hi, Craig. How are you?
I'm great. Keri, first of all, take me through what your research has revealed here in this report.
Sure, absolutely. So End It Now has been a fairly extensive process in the making. The research actually involved a number of stages. So first we did a very extensive literature review pertaining to best practices around violence against women, as well as best practices for reducing access barriers to services. Most of our information, we really wanted it to come from the community members, in particular women who were exposed to violence, who had experience trying to access current supports. Mm-hmm. So we reached out to them using, a variety of media and engaged in one-on-one interviews with female victims of violence in our community to learn from their experiences and take what they had in terms of knowledge to share with the resources in our community.
Well, let's start there, Keri. Let's just focus on that for just a minute, because let's talk about the barriers that were in existence or currently exist when it comes to accessing services. So women are experiencing violence in their lives, and there are barriers that prevent them from accessing the services that could help. What are some of those barriers?
Absolutely. So, there's both institutional barriers and personal barriers that act on women in their search for help. Some of the institutional barriers that we've identified include intrusive and lengthy intake processes, high rates of staff turnover amongst some of the service organizations, lack of privacy, especially for some of the Aboriginal communities and smaller rural communities surrounding the city. Anonymity and privacy is a really big concern due to the smaller population sizes of those areas. Admission requirements, for example, some shelters require sobriety to be there, right? And we know that there is significant multidirectionality between violence, mental health, and addictions. Hours of operation, violence doesn't just happen between 9 to 5, and yet most of the services operating in the city, those are the hours that they operate. So we really want to extend some of those. Wait lists is another barrier that can be posed. I know I work for Catholic Family Services, and generally to see a counselor there, we can get people in right away, but, during our busy times of year, there can be up to a 2-week wait period that people are going without services. Location is another one. Prince Albert is a hub of support for the surrounding area, and so things like transportation can become a barrier when services are located within the city core.
It's a long list, Keri, and you could probably go on, it sounds like.
I could, yes.
It sounds
and those are just the institutional barriers. So.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask you to switch gears there to the personal barriers as well.
Absolutely. So definitely women in the community talked about fear and stigma as being personal barriers. There's still kind of a culture of silence surrounding violence against women. General community denial of the problem, and I think that stems from some of that silence, is that because violence against women isn't something that's talked about in the community, generally we can, or community members can very easily deny that the problem exists in their own neighborhood. Childcare and transportation, like I mentioned before, often are not offered for some programs. Some programs they are. Lack of family support has been identified as a really big one. If you are with a partner who is abusive, you might not have the support of your family in leaving that relationship. And then pride is another one that we identified as a barrier. Most of the services, especially located in the downtown core, do provide support to populations who are typically at risk. And so many women, like you had mentioned in your introduction, many women of upper class socioeconomic status tend to see some of those services and say, oh, well, that's not for me. So what we're really trying to do is raise awareness about what those services are actually providing to people in terms of support, and letting people know that, there is a place for everyone in the community to get help if they're experiencing violence.
Keri, let's take a closer look at, if we don't run out of time here, a closer look at one of each of the institutional and the personal problems. I want to ask you about anonymity. You mentioned that as a problem when it comes to accessing services for women. How do you even begin to offer a level of anonymity to encourage women to seek help?
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So we've been working with some of the Aboriginal communities surrounding Prince Albert to improve anonymity of services. So generally, on reserve especially, services tend to be provided in, the health center or the band office. And so, anyone in the community can see you coming or going, and a lot of questions can be raised. Given the small population sizes of those communities, chances are you probably know someone who's an employee of where you're trying to access service. So what we're trying to do is create better transportation so that women in rural and on reserve communities can get into the city where they do have a little bit more anonymity and privacy to access services here. We're also looking at exploring options for improving online support. So, for example, Skype counseling maybe could be made available so that women in the privacy of their own home could access services and don't actually need to be seen going into a service provider to get the support they need.
I think when it comes to a personal barrier, the suggestion that family support is often not in place, and that can create a huge barrier for women to turn for help. How do you begin to address that? How do you encourage family support?
Well, part of the initiative is really aimed at challenging the normalization of violence in the community, and a large portion of that is going to occur through public education and outreach. So what we really want to do is raise community awareness about issues of violence against women and about the reality of violence against women from a perspective of the causes as opposed to just the symptoms of it, so that the community more broadly can have a better understanding of how violence is affecting the community, including, probably people in their family, given that 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women experience violence throughout their lifetime, really trying to extend the scope of responsibility for violence as a community and family problem, not just a problem that women experience.
And there's only about a minute left, and I hate to squeeze it in. It's a big issue, but I did mention it off the top. One of the things you discovered in your research was that wealthier women sometimes found it more difficult to access services. Can you just tell me briefly about that particular part of what you discovered?
Absolutely, sure. So we do have a lot of services in the community that are doing things like outreach. So, working with people who tend to be located in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, people working with, services working with people on the street, those people then have access to significantly more information just because they're exposed to it, right, through programs like outreach. Whereas many women of higher socioeconomic statuses don't necessarily have that contact with service providers in their day-to-day realities. So one of the things that we've been really trying to do is advertise, going to those women as opposed to asking those women to come to our services.
Right.
So, advertising about programs in fitness facilities and in restaurants or in the malls, places, that would be frequented by women who are of a higher socioeconomic background.
Keri,
so
thank you for that. I'm going to let you go.
go.
We've just run out of time, but thank you for bringing us up to speed. Many challenges, and we wish you the best.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
That's Keri Okanik. She is the Community Plan Coordinator for Setting the Stage.